Hello and welcome. This is the message for North Kannapolis Wesleyan Church, or I should say this is the message coming to you from North Kannapolis Wesleyan Church for Sunday, May 24th. And whoever you are, wherever you are, and whenever you are watching this, we welcome you and I thank you for joining us for this message. Last week, we talked about a moment of transition in the time of the people of Israel as they were crossing the Jordan River. They were putting an end to one season of challenge and struggle that they had experienced, 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But they knew they were entering a new season of challenge and struggle. I don't think that they knew that it would be nearly 400 years before they really felt like they had achieved peace and prosperity in the promised land. But they knew it would be a while, and they knew that there would be many battles in front of them. And so it was a transition, a rejoicing that one challenge was over, and yet a recognition that another challenge was ahead of them. And I felt like that was appropriate because we are in a similar situation. The shutdowns are rolling back here in North Carolina, and we can rejoice that one season of challenge and struggle is coming to a close. And yet, because we know that the virus is not done here in this time, we know that there's many challenges still ahead of us. And this is a universal message always. When you graduate from high school, you can celebrate that one set of challenges is behind you, and yet you recognize that a new set of challenges is ahead of you. When you finally land the job that you've always wanted, you can celebrate that there is one set of challenges that are behind you, and yet a whole new set of challenges awaiting you as you adjust to and learn a new job, a new company culture, a new workplace. We never put an end to challenge in our lives, but we can celebrate when the Lord brings us through one battle. And so I thought this week maybe we would talk about the Battle of Jericho. That happened very shortly, almost the next thing occurring in the biblical record after the parting of the Jordan River is the miraculous collapse of the walls of Jericho. And then as I began to look at the story of the Battle of Jericho, I realized that the Battle of Jericho, that story does not begin in Joshua chapter 6. It actually begins in Joshua chapter 2 with the story of Rahab and something that happened before the Israelites crossed the Jordan River. You see, before they crossed the river, Joshua, the leader of Israel at this time, had sent 2 spies into the promised land. He sent them to Jericho to find out what was going on with Jericho. While they were there, they met a woman named Rahab, and the choices that she made set the stage for the victory in Jericho sometime later, maybe several weeks later, maybe a month later. Not a very long period of time, it doesn't seem to be. And yet what she did determined in many ways what happened then. And she has, in some ways, a very magnificent story because of all that we can learn from it. And so today, we're going to look at Joshua chapter 2, the story of Rahab and the spies. If you've got your Bible ready, it would be great if you would go ahead and open it to Joshua chapter 2. If not, that's okay. And if you need to pause this video so that you can get your Bible, that's perfectly appropriate so that you can follow along. I'm going to be reading in the New International Version. And again, this is Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 1 and reading all the way through verse 24. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. "Go, look over the land," he said, "especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from." At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us this land." So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, "Go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Now the men had said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." What amazing courage that must have given to Joshua and to the spies and to anyone else in Israel who heard the story that the people of Jericho were already terrified of them, that the word of the Red Sea crossing, which had happened 40 years earlier, had reached them, that the defeat of the Amorite kings in the wilderness, which had happened sometime earlier, had reached them, and they all knew what Israel's God was capable of. And if you'll permit me to speculate for a moment, Rahab appears to have changed sides very quickly, but I don't believe that when the spies showed up, that was the first that she had thought about the fact that being with the God of Israel might be preferable to being there in Jericho, serving and putting her trust in the gods that the Canaanites living in Jericho believed in. You see, if she had heard these stories, and one of the things that some scholars believe about Rahab is that she was not only a prostitute, but that she would have also been an innkeeper. At this time in history, those two professions appear to have been very strongly linked. And this could, many people throughout the years have wondered what these good Jewish boys were doing visiting the home of a prostitute when sent on a reconnaissance mission. And it could explain part of their thinking, which was that if she was the innkeeper, that would have been the most normal, the most appropriate, the least raising of suspicion location for them to have gone to as travelers. They may have tried to conceal the fact that they were Israelites, but they couldn't conceal the fact that they were visitors. No one in that town knew them. And so however they dressed, whatever kind of disguise they had no home of their own in Jericho to go to when night came. And so it may have been very natural for them to go to the home of Rahab, because it may have been the only lodging establishment available there. She was probably used to many guests coming and going for both of her professions. Okay? And so that's one thing that we need to know about her. And she had heard this story maybe from many of the people who traveled and took lodging in her home. And she appears to very, very rapidly make this decision. She had no warning that these Israelite spies were coming to her home, and she very quickly had to make the decision whether to turn them in or whether to turn against her own people, to commit treason in order to take a chance that she could side with this God of Israel, who she was afraid of, who everybody in her town was afraid of. She had the opportunity to jump ship, and she took it. And I suspect that since she probably had known these stories for some time, again, the Red Sea crossing had happened 40 years earlier. She may have known about that for years. She may have known about it her whole life. We don't know how old she was at this time, but it's easy to imagine that she was younger than 40. And we don't know how fast the news had traveled. But she may have been wondering for many, many years, what will happen if these people bring their God to our borders? What will happen if these people and their God come to the walls of our city? What if they decide to come here and they pose a threat to us? What will I do? Because nothing I've ever heard that my God or my gods or whoever she worshiped could do compared to that. If it could, she wouldn't have been so afraid. And all of the people in Jericho would not have been so afraid. So the things that she tells the spies give them so much courage. And whatever information that they gathered about the city and its weaknesses ultimately proved to be irrelevant. Because what God did end up doing was he told the army of Israel just to march around the city once each day for 6 days, and then 7 times on the 7th day. I think that's 13 times. And then the walls just fell. And if that was a natural occurrence, I think they could have tried it again and again if marching around the city was enough to weaken the walls. But something happened that was God's plan to make it easy for them to do this. And so I don't think any of the weaknesses of this city were significant in the reports that they brought back. I think what was important that they brought back was the story of the fear of the people of Jericho, and that they knew that their gods, if they were real, were no match for the God of Israel. And so I suspect that she may have wondered for a long time about if there would be some way for her to switch sides, if there would be some way for her to put herself under the protection of the God of Israel. Maybe she thought that it was impossible. Maybe she never even considered the possibility. But she may have longingly wished that there was some way to be on the other side of those city walls with this other people. And yet she probably would have known that she wouldn't have been welcomed if for no other reason than the fact that she was an outsider. People then are a lot like people today. They don't always like people who are different from them, and they don't always like outsiders, and they're not always very excited about the thought of taking someone in who's immigrating from another place. Many different reasons, many different emotions, many different motivations. But she probably knew that there would be no chance that she would be welcomed there. She probably expected that this God of Israel would have no interest in her, because most of the gods of that time had a limited interest in individual people, let alone this lowly working class woman. Why would that God have any interest in her? And yet, miraculously, completely unexpectedly, One day, 2 Jewish men show up at her door on a mission from the God of Israel. Now, it was not a mercy mission. This was not a mission of compassion. This was not a mission of outreach or what we would call evangelism. They were not there to help her. They were probably hoping that she wouldn't figure out that they were Israelite. But she did. Somehow, maybe they felt that they could confide in her. Maybe something in the conversation caused them to trust her. But she figured it out, and they did not come to help her. But against their intentions, God created an opportunity for her to do the thing which she may have longed for, maybe even for many years, and that was to switch sides, to have a chance to cast her lot in with the God that she knew was more powerful. And so the Lord gave her this opportunity she couldn't have imagined. Whatever her thought process was, whatever her emotions were, whether she had thought about it before now or not, we really don't know. But we do know that she switched sides. And there's some things that I want you to learn about Rahab, some things we can learn from her, even some things that we may be able to imitate. And the first one is that she knew when to switch sides. She knew that when what she had in life was not working, that when you have an opportunity to make a change for the better, you go for it. And some people might call her an opportunist, and some people might accuse her of disloyalty. Now, she was loyal to her family. She found a way to protect her whole family in the process of this. And so whatever she may have committed against her country, she was loyal to her family. We cannot accuse her of abandoning that. But this woman may have been an opportunist, but she was not a fool. She was smart, and she made what God considered to be a good decision. She switched where she was putting her faith. She suddenly had an opportunity to side with the God of Israel, and she took it. And so may I submit to you today, whatever time you're watching this video, whether it's morning or night or afternoon, may I submit to you in this moment that this is a good moment to consider whether the things that you are putting your trust in life are really working out for you, whether the way that you are living is really working out for you. There's a phrase and kind of a joke, how's that working out for you? You know, okay, you made that decision and I see why you feel that you have the right to make that decision, but really, how is it working out for you? And I need to be careful because sometimes good decisions don't feel good for a long time. Sometimes good decisions lead to difficult consequences, and sometimes it takes a very, very long time for a good decision to pay off in the way that you know it's going to, but in the meantime, it can create many hardships. And we have to be very careful, and we have to use wisdom when evaluating our decisions, because sometimes we are paying for something, but it was still the right thing to do. And so I don't want to encourage you to jump ship quickly if the right decision turns out to have difficult consequences. But there does come a time in life to look and say, did I really make the right decision? Is it really going to pay off? Or am I seeing now that this was the wrong decision, that it is never going to pay off, that this thing I've been putting my trust in is not going to be strong enough to help me where I need it most, that this way of living that I have, that these habits that I have, that these relationships that I am in are not what they should be. I'm not conducting them the way that I should. She knew when it was time to switch sides, and the Bible does not condemn her for her disloyalty. The Bible does not condemn her for changing her mind. The Bible records her as one of the heroes of faith because she was smart enough to know that when the real God comes to town, it's okay to switch sides, to trade something that is false for something that is real. And so today I ask you, is it time for you to switch sides on something? And if so, what are you waiting for? Let's not wait any longer. The opportunity may not be open forever. It may be time to switch sides. The second thing that she knew that's very difficult for many of us to know is that she knew when to break the rules. And what is so interesting here is that Hebrews chapter 11 records her as a hero of the faith for her actions And James, I think it's James chapter 2, records her as an example of wisdom, an example of faith showing itself in good deeds because she acted to hide the spies. She was considered righteous for helping the spies escape. But the problem in that is that this righteous act involved telling a lie. And if you're like me and you grew up in church, you may be more confused by the fact that a person was considered righteous for committing a lie than you may be about the fact that a former prostitute ended up in the Hall of Heroes of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Many of us are more distressed by her dishonesty than we are by her other choices. And yet, in that moment, with the king's messengers standing at her door, and the Israelite spies, the agents of the true God, up on her roof, she knew in that moment that the right thing to do was to tell a lie. And you might ask whether honesty was valued in her culture or not. Did she even consider lying to be wrong? I suspect that she had been a person of some trustworthiness, or the messengers of the king would not have trusted her. They would not have gone on in search of the spies instead of searching her home. If she had a reputation for dishonesty, they probably would have searched her home anyway. And so it seems that she either had some leverage or that she had the ability to be trusted because she had a good reputation as a trustworthy person. And she chose to throw that away in this moment. And she understood, perhaps in a way that we need to understand sometimes, that doing right is more than just keeping the rules. And again, this is very dangerous because it is so easy for so many of us to look for excuses to break the rules over and over again. But maybe it will be clearer if I say it in reverse, okay? In this case, she knew that in this moment, the right thing to do was to break the rules. The reverse of that is that being righteous and having faith is much more than simply keeping the rules all the time. She had faith, and yet in the same moment she was breaking the rules as an act of faith. It is possible to keep all of the rules and yet to have no faith. And on Judgment Day, she was found righteous because of her faith. And my question for you is, on Judgment Day, are you expecting to be counted righteous because of your faith? Or are you hoping to be counted righteous because you've been so successful at keeping the rules? It is not keeping the rules that saves us. It is faith. And there are rare moments in history when godly people have decided that the most righteous thing to do was to tell a lie or even to take a life. People today on the front lines of public safety and the military are faced with this ethical dilemma every day. Is it ever right to do the things that we know normally are wrong? She understood. I can't give you any kind of a rule that will answer the question for you every time, but she understood that this was the right time to break the rules. The spies she was hiding were righteous. The king that she was returning a lie to was wicked, and she chose to take the side of that which was righteous in that moment. Which kind of leads to the next thing that I want you to see about her life. This is a fine line, but it's very important. Rahab's salvation occurred before her lifestyle changed, or I could say before her life changed, before her habits changed, before her pattern of living changed. But her salvation did result in a changed life. We can say that she came under the protection of the God of Israel in that very first moment when she decided to hide the spies. And as she chose to lie to the messengers after she'd already hidden them, then the second decision was that she was forced to lie. And we can say that she was under the protection of the God of Israel at that very moment when she chose to put her trust in him instead of in her people. And so we can say that she was saved then. Her protection was in effect then and continued to take effect by her continued choices. She continued to choose to help them to get out the window, to hang that scarlet cord in her window, to leave the scarlet cord in the window for that period of time, probably at least a week, maybe even a month or two. Did she wonder if anyone would notice that she had that thread outside of her window, if it would arouse suspicion, if the king of Jericho would come back looking for her again because of the act of keeping that unusual object in her window? Continuing to do that was an act of her continued faith. And when she kept that scarlet cord in her window on Judgment Day for Jericho, she was saved. And yet, when the battle was over, she didn't just say to Joshua and the Israelites, "Thank you," and take up her former way of life in a different Canaanite town, continuing to worship her old gods. She didn't say to the God of Israel, "Thank you for saving me one time, I'll see you later," and go back to her old patterns of worship. She did continue into a changed life. She joined the people of Israel. We have every reason to believe that she became obedient to the law that God had given Moses for the people of Israel. We have every reason to believe that she began to worship according to the regulations for the people of Israel at the tabernacle. She did end up marrying a Jewish man, and her son was known as a righteous man who also married a foreign woman who had also abandoned her foreign gods. And nowhere in there is there any suggestion that Rahab did anything past that time that would have been opposed to what God had told the people to do. Her salvation happened before her life changed, but her salvation did result in a changed life. So, do not claim Rahab as your role model unless your faith has resulted in a changed life. It's not about making one good decision. It's about a new course and a new path based on a new faith, a new guide, a new life. So her salvation did result in a changed life, even though it was effective. Her salvation was effective before her life had the opportunity to make a change. The last thing I need to point out, and this may seem like a rabbit trail, but it just feels too important to not mention, is that her story clarifies what it means for us, not so much as individuals, but as families and as churches, to be a pure and righteous community. If you have studied the Old Testament, you know that God commanded the Israelites that they were not to intermarry with the people who lived in the Promised Land. And so it was illegal under normal circumstances for a Jewish man to take a Canaanite wife. And yet, no one raises any objections at the marriage of Rahab to a man named Salmon, who was a member of the Jewish community. Nobody ever objects to this. When her son, Boaz, does the same thing and marries another foreign woman, nobody raises any objections to this. When their descendant, King David, becomes the king of Israel, no one claims that his ethnic lineage is not pure enough for him to serve as the king of God's people. And many, many generations later, when Jesus comes as a descendant of King David, a descendant of Boaz and Ruth and Rahab and Salmon, no one suggests that Jesus' bloodline isn't pure enough, even though the Old Testament repeatedly commands the people of Israel not to intermarry, and even sometimes we find that that was punishable by death. What's the big deal? Why was there no problem here? Because the Jewish people at this time understood something very clearly that often throughout Christian history we have forgotten, that the purpose of the commandments against intermarriage never had anything to do with ethnic purity. It had to do with remaining faithful to the God of Israel. And that's why Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 4 gives the commandment against intermarriage and then clearly states that the purpose of the commandment was so that the people of the land would not turn the hearts of the people of Israel away from their God, from the true God. It was all about avoiding unfaithfulness to God. Once Rahab had abandoned her foreign gods, once she had abandoned her former lifestyle, she had come to live and worship among the people of Israel, she became an Israelite. There was no intermarriage here. She was now a member of the people of Israel because she belonged to the God of Israel. Jesus actually said this in Matthew chapter 3, and then it is repeated again, I think, in Luke chapter 3, that out of these stones, God can raise up children for Abraham. And Paul says it in Galatians chapter 3, that those are Abraham's descendants who share in the faith of Abraham. It's not about the bloodline, it's about the faith. Brothers and sisters in our churches and in our families, is this really what we believe, and is this really what we teach? If the Lord sent to your church, or if your son or daughter desired to bring into your family someone like Rahab, someone with a questionable past, but who had now put their faith in the true God and who had changed their lifestyle, who had begun to live according to the commandments of the true God. If your son or daughter wanted to bring that kind of person into your family, would you welcome them? What if they were from a different place, a different location, a different people group, but they shared the same faith? Would you consider them ineligible to join your family? What about your church? A person who may have come from a very different place than you, may have come out of a very dysfunctional situation, may have come from some other part of the world, may speak a different language, may look very different from you, but they share the same faith. Would you welcome them? Or did you pick up somewhere along the way an outdated teaching about purity in the community based on a misunderstanding of what God told the people of Israel in the Old Testament? Rahab was welcomed as an Israelite, and then she was welcomed into the family of Salmon, and then her daughter-in-law was welcomed into that family, even though she had come from Moab. So much about Rahab clarifies so much for us. When we slide into legalism, we need to remember that Rahab's faith led her to break the rules, and it brought her salvation even before her life changed. When we begin to slide into racism or believing that we are better than anyone else, we remember that Rahab was welcomed as a follower of the true God and welcomed into the holy community. When we feel like we can't make a change in our life because it would be disloyal on some level, we remember that sometimes faith requires breaking the rules. And if we ever think that salvation is a one-time decision that should not affect the way we live the rest of our life, we remember that Rahab left her old way of life for a new people, a new way of worship. She served a new God, because spies on a hostile mission ended up on her door and accidentally brought her mercy. Let's pray. Father, help us to learn what we need to learn, and help us not to glorify Rahab, but help us to glorify you, who can reach anywhere and do anything and save anyone. You can offer mercy through people who are on a mission of hostility. And you can offer forgiveness, and you can offer citizenship, regardless of how far away a person has come from. Father, I ask you to help us, to help me, to help our families, to help our churches to understand what it really means to have faith. We love you. Help us to love you more. We trust you. Help us to trust you more. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you.